This is a Carboline production.
A couple years ago, my boss walked into my office carrying 3 thick binders. He said nothing, he just set them on my desk and he left. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. And it turned out it was more than interesting. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of this episode of The Red Bucket. Those big binders were old. 2 of them contained project summaries from the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and the other one was lots older than that. It was a collection of case histories that someone had compiled in around 1974. These contain all sorts of interesting history that I think is worth digging into on the podcast, and so that's what this episode will be. This won't be the only episode like it because there's so much worth covering in 3 binders full of projects, but today's does have a theme. The theme is Canada. I've found 4 past projects completed there, each one with some historical significance and each one quite familiar to locals and non-locals alike. And I'll bring in a colleague a little later on who was involved with 2 of them. So I hope you enjoy. For our first stop on this little tour, you could argue there isn't a better-known modern landmark in the entire country. I'm talking about the CN Tower, the anchor of the Toronto skyline since its completion in 1976. The tower is the tallest freestanding structure in the Western Hemisphere. It was the tallest in the world until 2009. Today, it has the world's highest elevator with a glass floor that goes up 1,135 feet. That elevator takes you to the world's highest bar, 18 feet higher up than all of that, at 1,152 feet, you will be in the world's highest and also largest revolving restaurant. That restaurant contains the world's highest wine cellar, but when you're that high up, I wonder if they should find a different word for it. None of those things is the reason why the CN Tower was built. Canadian National Railway built it partially as a demonstration of Canada's industrial prowess, but also to improve communications in the region. The 60s and 70s saw tremendous growth in Toronto, which included construction of skyscraper after skyscraper after skyscraper. Those interfered with existing point-to-point microwave data links that required line of sight to function. So you built the world's tallest thing, put all your antennas up there, and the communication problems go away. 8 TV stations and 9 radio stations broadcast from the tower. The Toronto Transit Commission uses it for some of their communications too. So, 3 cheers to the CN Tower. That's 50 years old this year, 2026. It is as essential today as it was back then. There's one superlative I didn't mention yet, and that's the one most relevant to this story. The CN Tower has the world's longest metal staircase. 2,579 steps in total. The system protecting those stairs would have been quite familiar to construction pros of the 1970s. It was Carbozinc 11 inorganic zinc-rich primer underneath Carboline 190HB. That was 190HB in orange, a fact that becomes important later. So, Carboline coatings on the world's longest metal staircase. And maybe you're wondering, are those coatings still there? Who on earth would even know 50 and more years after the job was done if any of this is still there? So this is the part of the episode where someone associated with the tower would join us to answer the question. And the problem is, I just couldn't get anybody. I tried. I asked around. No one has answered, at least not yet. And I admit that I came at them with a very strange question. Well, what about the applicator? The case history in that ancient binder that all this came from named a company, and the company still looks like it exists. So I did some asking around, and again, I'm sad to say I just couldn't get an answer. But I don't think all is lost. The internet provided me a great clue, because I did an image search of CN Tower stairs. That's how I found out that United Way of Greater Toronto does their annual climb. Lots of people take pictures of that including the United Way themselves and also the Toronto Star newspaper. Photos from each of those sources show that, at least as of November 2025, just a few months ago from this recording, the stairs and the hand railings were a dark gray color. Carboline 190HB was orange. But when you zoom in on some of those photos, it's clear that some of the gray paint has chipped away to reveal what's underneath, and what's underneath is bright orange. So my guess is, and really this is just a guess, that the Carbozinc 11 Carboline 190HB orange originally applied to the stairs of the CN Tower 50 and more years ago is still there, just with some or all of it having had a paint job since then. Next, we head east to Nova Scotia, a place called Point Tupper. Locals will know where this is, but for the benefit of the rest of us, it's located on the Strait of Canso, which is a narrow bit of ocean separating Nova Scotia's mainland from Cape Breton Island. It's not a wide gap, it's less than half a mile at its skinniest point. But from prehistory until the 1950s, the only way to get across it was by ferry. People, cars, trucks, trains, they all used the ferries. That changed in 1955 when the Canso Causeway opened. The causeway carries a railway line and the Trans-Canada Highway across the strait. It isn't very long, it's less than a mile, but it's made a big impact. The first thing it did was, unfortunately, create a temporary economic slump at Mulgrave and Point Tupper. Those are the two towns that the causeway connects. That's where the railcar ferry was, and the causeway made all of that obsolete. But local fortunes quickly improved once local leaders realized that by building the causeway, they'd also created a well-sheltered, ice-free harbor. The Canadian government was busy throughout the 1960s kick-starting industrial development in that area, and dominoes started to fall. A big Swedish pulp and paper manufacturer set up a mill in Point Tupper, and eventually it needed more electricity, so Nova Scotia Power commissioned an oil-fired power plant right next door in 1973. The plant got its fuel from a Gulf oil refinery, which also was next door. The refinery imported its crude oil, and that was a cinch now because the Canso Causeway had turned this part of the strait into a deep-water harbor that doesn't freeze. This was the era of the supertanker. How supertankers came to exist is interesting enough history on its own, but by the time the Point Tupper generating station began burning its oil in 1973, it was all about moving as much oil as you could, as efficiently as you could. And that's how one of the very first supertanker crude oil terminals in North America came to be, right there at Point Tupper. As it's built, the Point Tupper terminal wharf is 2,000 feet long, capable of handling vessels with drafts as deep as 90 feet. It's held in place by 30-inch and 36-inch steel piles driven down into the seabed. There are two different Carboline systems protecting those piles. Most of them have two coats of Carbomastic 14, which is an old coal tar epoxy mastic that we don't make anymore, and the other piles have two coats of Carbomastic 14, but those were applied over a primer coat of Carbozinc 11. Carboline made the coatings for the automated loading arms that service the tankers there too. That system was the same one as at the CN Tower staircase, Carbozinc 11 followed by Carboline 190HB. Well, what was 190HB so good for? It was an ideal finish coat for industrial equipment in atmospheric exposure in marine environments. Its resistance to salt and moisture were excellent, and it featured very good abrasion resistance. You would be shocked at how many different projects in those old binders all had Carboline 190HB. All of this infrastructure at Point Tupper is still there, and it's still in use. Is that same coating system still in service? That I don't know. If it is, that's over 50 years old. Maybe someone out that way knows and can send us a note. Anyway, the story at Point Tupper is far from over. It is still a hive of activity thanks in part to Everwind Fuels. They're a producer of renewable and low-carbon energy operating in Atlantic Canada. One of their most exciting projects today is the Point Tupper Green Fuels Project, which they are developing jointly with local Mi'kmaq communities. The project blends old and new. What's old, of course, is the tanker terminal. The nearby tank farm is old too. It's been there since the refinery was built. What's even older than that is the wind, which is important for the new wind turbines that Everwind has been building in the area. And even newer still is the processing plant designed to use that wind energy to produce green ammonia. Everwind expects to begin construction on that plant this year on land adjacent to the tank farm and just a mile from the tanker terminal. You couldn't pick a more perfect spot for any of this, and all because of that little causeway. I was glad to have some help telling these next two stories from someone who was actually there. Anyone who knows Pedro Escudero probably agrees he's one of the most knowledgeable figures in the industry in Canada, and they must certainly agree he's also the nicest. When I caught him on the phone, my first question for him was to explain just what his job title meant. You are the engineering services manager for Canada, but in plain language, what does that mean? What do you do?
I work primarily with engineering consultants and architects, the people that generate the projects, the people that write the specifications, specifically the coding specifications for these projects. And I help by proposing different language, different coding systems, and trying to address what the foreseeable issues in a particular project are.
And how long have you been in the coatings industry?
In the coatings industry, I've been over more than 30 years. It's getting close to 34, 35 years. With Carboline, it's going to be 28 years in a couple of months.
You might laugh at me for this. I had a fascination when I was a little kid. Baseball stadiums and really tall buildings. I had books of baseball park. You know, this was probably like the early 2000s maybe when I'm reading these books. And one of my favorite pictures of all time was the SkyDome because it has those two things in one, because there's almost every famous image of the SkyDome has the CN tower in the background. And I thought, gosh, this is perfect. It's the two things that I love the most.
Absolutely. Yes. They're right beside each other. Yeah.
So the SkyDome, this is another historically significant structure in Toronto, but take it from there, Pedro. What goes on there? How long has it been there?
The SkyDome, obviously it's a baseball stadium mostly. It's the home of the Blue Jays. And the peculiarity of it is that it has a roof that it moves. So the idea is that the roof can be, I would say, put away. If you see that there must be videos on YouTube on how the roof moves. The roof has three sections. One of the sections at the end, which obviously is a curved section, it doesn't move. It stays stationary. But the other two sections, both the middle section and the round section on the other side, they actually rotate. They go on rails, and all three of them, when the roof is open, all three of them are in this basically 1/3 of the stadium. The 2/3 of the stadium are open. So with that particular design, the SkyDome has a roof structure, it's steel roof structure that supports all the roofs. There's three portions to it. But they are obviously designed to withstand not only the loads of snow and weather and you name it, but also the movement of these massive sections that has to retreat in and become one side of the stadium. My understanding is that takes between 20 and 30 minutes for that movement to happen. So the other way around, when the roof is open and then there is some clouds that show up, it also takes 20 to 30 minutes to get out of the rain if if that is the case. The SkyDome was built in, I believe it was the year in 1986. 1986, it also happens to be the year that my family and I arrived into Canada. That's the year that we came to Canada. So it was in the news. It was very prominent. The name SkyDome, it came from a contest. There were some radios in the Toronto area that they held a contest so people could propose names, and the one that won the the contest, it was the SkyDome, which is it's very descriptive because there is a dome that opens up the sky to the people in the stadium. The the steel was manufactured actually in Canada by Dominion Bridge. It was designed mostly by the Yoles engineers. Yoles have been acquired by different other consultant companies, but I had the opportunity at one point in time to talk to one of the designers that worked for Yoles at the time. So one of the structural designers that worked on this, and they were all very impressed by the fact that they had a paint system that it was one coat of an inorganic zinc, Carboline 11, not a top coat, nothing else, just sandblast and apply one coat. And today, which is, well, it's basically 40 years later, you look at this massive steel structure, and there is not a sign of paint problems anywhere.
Carbozinc 11 might be the only product that people talk about more or love more than Carbomastic 15.
Yeah.
You said that the engineering group was quite impressed that there was just a single coat system that would achieve the corrosion protection they were looking for. Were they considering other system types at the same time?
Yes, I believe that there were several other systems being considered at that point in time. However, the single coat of Carbozinc 11, it was very attractive, not only from the performance point of view, but also from the cost point of view, because they obviously one coat system, it still had the cost of the surface preparation and the application and material of one coat, but they did save what would have been considered alongside a three coat system, which would have been a bridge coating system, which would have had an intermediate coat and a top coat. So the savings that the owners realized at the time were significant.
It just is another one of those feathers in the cap for Carbozinc 11. It's like, in a way, it's like Carbomastic 15, in that there's really not a use
Yep.
case you can't find for it.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Those two products are definitely some of our iconic legacy products that have been used many, many times. And they, well, by now, with all the progress in the coatings industry, there are different versions of them that try to address or make them easier for certain applications. But the basis of it, the principles, why they work, they are still very prevalent nowadays.
There's one project left for us to talk about. Pedro, let's talk through the Peterborough lift lock on the Trent Severn Waterway.
The Trent Severn waterways, it's a man-made large canal or river that connects different lakes, and it goes between, the end of it is actually at Lake Ontario, and it starts in the northern part of the province. It was built mainly to allow the transportation of logs of wood from northern Ontario to the southern parts into some wood mills and pulp and paper plants, and for loading it onto ships that can navigate the St. Lawrence Seaway, which Lake Ontario is part of. This waterway nowadays is not used for those purposes anymore. It's not for used by the logging industry, except some small portions of it, but it's used mostly for recreational navigation. So there are boats that go from Lake Ontario. They can go all the way up to northern you through this navigable waterway. It's very picturesque. Now, because of the differences in elevation throughout this route, then we, there are some lift locks along the way, including the Peterborough lift lock, which I believe it may still be the tallest lift lock in the world. It's not the only lift lock in the waterway, but it is the most significant one. And it's also located in the middle of the city of Peterborough, which is it's a medium-sized city in the province of Ontario.
Was that the only one, or have we been involved from time to time on any of these other locks? Because there are several dozen of them along the way.
Yes, we have been involved in this for a very long time. In particular, way before my time. So during my tenure, yes, we did. We were involved with the Peterborough lift lock. We were involved with another lock called the Kirkwood lift lock in several of the dams that are along the way. It was mostly because it was the 100th anniversary. There was some big ceremony. The Prime Minister of Canada attended the ceremonies and so on. So I believe that it was mostly for show, for aesthetic purposes. There were no pressing corrosion issues that would have had any implication in the operation or the safety of the lift locks. We were contacted by the owners of the waterway, which is basically ultimately is the government of Canada, but through some federal agencies such as Parks Canada. The main reason why I was told we were contacted is because of the long history that we had with the waterway, and in particular with the Peterborough lift locks. As far as they could trace it back, all of the latest times that the lift locks have been painted, they have used Carboline coating systems. And so we had a very well-established reputation with the owners, and that's why they contacted us. The project consists of two main areas. So one area was the inside of the log, of the lift portion of the log, which is basically a very large tub, which is full of water. And that's the one where the boats will go in when they need to either be raised or be lowered from the two different elevations on the waterway.
To help anyone listening kind of picture what this is, you took the words right out of my mouth, Pedro. I was going to say it's like a bathtub. It's just huge.
Yes, it's two big tubs, and the size of the boats that go into this, yes, it's not little canoes. You can probably fit a couple of dozens of little canoes if that was the case. There are some tour boats that actually fit in there with some other boats. So it's two very large bathtubs. And when one bathtub is going up, the other one is coming down. That's how they keep on servicing the boating community, let's say, going up and down the waterway. So the inside of the waterway, of the lift lock, it did show some signs of corrosion. It was approximately 20 years old. And that area, it was a full removal and replacement of the coating system. So it was sandblasted down to bare metal and a new coating system applied to it. The outside of these tubs, it was in relatively good condition. There was some chalking and fading of the color and some minor areas of rust. So it was deemed that it was not necessary to fully remove the paint. It could be overcoated. It could be repainted. So the two systems had a different purpose, were in very different conditions, and the two of them involved different products. So the inside of the tub, or the left portion of it, I believe that was repainted with after sandblasting with 2 coats of CarboGuard A90. On the outside where the repaint happened, there was a coat of a tie coat, which is our Raspon. At the time, it was called Raspon Penetrating Sealer, which is an epoxy with very low viscosity. And then after that, there was a coat of Carbomastic 15, which is an epoxy mastic with aluminum flakes in it. And it all was top coated with an aliphatic polyurethane, Carbothane 133 HB at the time for UV protection, protecting the paint system from UV degradation.
Can you talk about why in each of these for the system on the inside, but also the system on the outside, why are those the right ones for this service scenario?
On the inside, it is the right system because it's a relatively easy system to apply, and it does have a long trajectory, a long case history. That system, 2 coat of A90 over sandblasted surface, had been used for steel that is under constant immersion in water for many, many years. So we did have the background in this particular case because it is a historic structure and so on. The owner doesn't want to take many chances, many risks to go with newer type of technologies that would not be proven. Like they have used this themselves for many, many years. On the outside, the reasoning is that the tie coat that I mentioned before, the Raspon, it can actually penetrate in any crevices. Again, this is a very old structure. There's many portions of it that have riveted elements, and when steel elements are connected by rivets, there is always gaps in there, very small gaps. So the low viscosity of the Raspon allows the paint itself, the epoxy, to penetrate into these crevices, helped obviously by capillarity forces, and then it seals off. So it does not allow any extra water to enter into these crevices, and it provides a good basis for the next coat. So the next coat, the Carbomastic 15, is an epoxy with aluminum flake in it, which the aluminum flake, because of the shape of the aluminum particles, when they are in a liquid medium, such as the epoxy resin in this case, they tend to align themselves parallel to each other. And when they do that, they form a very intricate way for any moisture to go from the environment into the steel surface. So it has a very low permeability and keeps the elements away from the steel very, very effectively. Now, because all epoxies do degrade under UV light, then we do use a polyurethane top coat, which does not degrade, at least not as quickly as epoxies, in order to keep the appearance of this, to keep the color and the gloss of the surface. So that's basically the reasoning behind that coating selection.
I refer listeners to episode 15, part 1 and part 2, where our colleague Dan Barabalt talked all about Carbomastic 15, probably one of the guys who knows the most about that out there in the world.
Yes.
We
Yes,
talked
absolutely.
all about Carbomastic 15.
But they started the project as soon as the weather allowed them to do. I believe that it was started somewhere in April of 2000, and the celebrations for the lift log were on Canada Day, which is July the 1st. So on July the 1st, obviously, it had to be fully painted and ready to go. They were very efficient. The contractor, the inspection, everything worked out, was very well coordinated. There is a curious thing that happened on the project. Because of the outside, as we said, it was an overcoat. the surface preparation was not to sandblast. It was basically to power wash the steel. The change in the gloss of the paint is usually associated with some degradation of the outside layers, which forms a substance that we call in the industry chalking. Okay, it looks, when you run your hand against it, it looks like there was chalk on the surface. It goes in your fingertips. So what was curious is that the inspector that actually was on that job is a very knowledgeable fellow. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year, and his name was Jim Stone, very well known in the industry. And what he did is that he said that in order for him to verify that they have removed all of this chalking from the structure, he took a dark coverall. It was either black or a very dark brown. So he put the coverall on and he told the contractor, I'm going to climb through the whole structure. And when I come back, there is any white stain on my coverall, you guys are going back and are washing it again because you didn't remove it totally. It's the only project where I have heard this type of verification from an inspector, and a very good inspector, on a job that is being power washed. So just a curiosity about it. Yeah, yeah. There is no ASTM standard for the coverall test, but Jim did use that, and I think that the contractor did a good job too. That I didn't hear that they had to go back and rewash the structure anyway.
I mean, that sticks in your mind too. I guess that works as well
Yeah.
as any ASTM standard does. You better get it done. Do it right.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can update you now, and we're in the year 2026, and I was actually there with my family in the summertime. This system has been in service for 26 years now. The outside, it looks really good. You can see a couple of spots of very localized spots of corrosion in some areas that may have been some other factors. Maybe somebody, knocked off the paint with an impact of something. And on the inside, it looks, I could not see any corrosion spots on the inside. And the outside, it will actually be in total 46 years, right? With an overcoat in the middle, but the original paint, it will be underneath the overcoat somewhere. It's definitely a source of pride for myself. When I'm talking to people, if people bring up the Peterborough lift locks, my eyes light up, and I think I've become difficult to turn into a different topic once I get talking about it. It's very important for me that we are part of the things that become the history of the different places.
Pedro stayed on the line a little longer after talking business so he could take part in the Red Bucket tradition of answering the 4 questions. We want to have some fun at the end of the episode, and I've got 4 fun questions for you. My first one is, because of how big Canada is, it would take someone quite a long time to drive across it, and I wonder, what is the longest Canadian drive you have ever had to make?
Oh, for me, it was a very long one. It's approximately over 4,000 kilometers, and it was from Vancouver to Toronto. And that was shortly after we arrived in Canada as new immigrants, and we had to look for the areas where most of the opportunities were. My family would sponsor us. They were living in Vancouver at the time. The situation in Vancouver was not very favorable for some new arrivals. So my family and I decided to move to Ontario, and I was the first one that had to take the trip all the way. It took more than 3 days to do that whole trip, and it was on a bus. So that is the longest one that I have taken. Still, many, many years after we arrived, that's still the longest road trip that I have taken in Canada.
Probably don't want to go on one any longer than that, or want anything close to that.
No, well, unless you do it on your own terms, right? You are on an RV or something that you're taking your time to look at all the scenery and every single area. I just wanted to get to Toronto as soon as I could, and the sooner I could in that fashion, it was more than 3 days.
Question number 2. What is the most interesting job site that you have ever visited?
Oh, but there is one that always sticks in my mind, and it's on a bridge, uh, and it's called the Burlington Skyway. It's the largest bridge in Ontario. It it's in the Hamilton area, Hamilton Burlington, therefore the name, and the bridge is it goes very high because it needs to allow the passage of vessels of big ships underneath it. So it's a very tall bridge. It climbs significantly. It's to the point that in some cases when there is high winds, they actually don't allow people to go over it because the wind picks up very high there. When that bridge was repainted, and it was repainted in 3 different stages, for some reason, it was deemed that the best way to scaffold, it was not hanging from the bridge deck, but it was from the actual ground, from the floor. So when you drove into the parking lot where the temporary construction parking lot, you were under the bridge and you would see this scaffolding that I believe it was the equivalent of 12 stories high. And of course, you had to climb 12 stories to go up and say hi to the crew that was applying the paint system. That is to me, it still takes the cake.
Question number 3. What is the hobby or interest that you would rather be doing right now instead of working?
Oh, well, that's a good question. And it's, you have to take into account that it's springtime, right? In Canada, we had a very hard winter, and now we're coming to spring. And my main hobby is actually gardening. And we are at the point where I have already planted some seeds, and I still have some other seeds that I need to plant to start indoors in order to be able to transplant them in about a month, when I am going to take some time off work to do all my planting. But that's definitely what I would rather be doing today. But I did a bit last weekend, and the rest of it is going to have to wait for next weekend.
Here's my last question. What is a Canadian vacation destination that you think is a hidden gem?
Oh, and I particularly think that is the west coast of Newfoundland. Uh, Newfoundland is the easternmost province in Canada. It is an island. It's a humongous island. It takes about 10 hours to drive from one side to the other of the island. But in the western portion of it, there is a park, a national park called the Gros Morne Park. And you see some of the contrasts in nature that are truly striking. There is all kinds of vegetations called very large and beautiful trees, but at the same time, you have the sea, you have lakes that have formed in the mountains, and all kinds of things to do. And of course, if you like seafood or fish, it's excellent in there. I love fish, and I have had some of my best meals in that area. So the west coast of Newfoundland, that is something that, in my opinion, is one of the best hidden gems for tourism in Canada.
For our first stop on this little tour, you could argue there isn't a better known modern landmark in the entire country. I'm talking about the CN Tower.